Rewire your brain for success in 21 days. What if the brain could be rewired in just 21 days, not through some extreme transformation, but through small, repeatable actions that slowly reshape how thoughts, habits, and decisions work? Neuroscience shows that the brain is constantly changing, a process called neuroplasticity, and it responds directly to what is repeated daily. That means success is not something locked behind talent or luck. It is something trained into the mind through patterns. But here is the part most people miss. The brain does not change because of what is planned. It changes because of what is done consistently. And over the next few minutes, this idea will start to feel less like theory and more like something that can actually be applied, step by step, without overcomplicating it. Understanding how the brain actually changes. Most people think change is about willpower, forcing new behaviors until they stick. But the brain does not respond well to force. It responds to repetition and reward. Every time an action is repeated, the neural pathway connected to it becomes slightly stronger. Over time, that pathway becomes the default route the brain chooses. This is why habits feel automatic after a while. The challenge is that the brain does not care if a habit is good or bad. It only cares about what is repeated. That means every small action is either reinforcing progress or reinforcing stagnation. Once this is understood, it becomes clear that change is not about doing something big once, but about doing something small often enough that the brain has no choice but to adapt. Why 21 days feels like a turning point. There is something interesting about the 21-day idea. It is not a magic number, but it represents a realistic window where patterns start to feel familiar. In the first few days, everything feels forced and unnatural. By the second week, resistance begins to drop slightly. By the third week, the action starts feeling less like a decision and more like part of a routine. This is where many people either lock in progress or fall back. The brain is at a point where it can go in either direction depending on consistency. Missing once does not break the pattern, but repeated inconsistency does. That is why this period matters. It is not about perfection, it is about staying close enough to the pattern that the brain keeps strengthening it. The power of starting smaller than expected. One of the biggest mistakes is starting with too much intensity. The brain sees drastic change as a threat and pushes back with resistance. That resistance shows up as procrastination, distraction, or sudden loss of energy. But when the starting point is small, the brain does not resist as much. It accepts the action more easily, and repetition becomes possible. A small habit repeated daily will always outperform a big habit done occasionally. Over time, that small action can grow naturally without forcing it. This is how the brain is rewired without creating burnout. It feels manageable, almost too easy at first, but that simplicity is what makes it sustainable. Breaking the old patterns that hold you back. Rewiring the brain is not just about building new habits, so it is also about weakening old ones. Every time an old pattern is not followed, its neural pathway becomes slightly weaker. But this requires awareness. Many habits run automatically, triggered by environment, emotions, or routine. The key is noticing these triggers and interrupting them, even briefly. That interruption creates space for a different action. Over time, the brain starts associating the trigger with a new response. This is how old patterns lose control. It does not happen instantly, but with repetition, the shift becomes noticeable. What once felt automatic starts to feel optional. The role of environment in rewiring the mind. Environment plays a silent but powerful role in shaping behavior. The brain constantly scans surroundings for cues on what to do next. If the environment is filled with distractions, the brain follows those signals. If it is structured to support focus, the brain adapts to that instead. Small changes in surroundings can create consistent wins without relying on constant effort. Removing friction for positive actions and adding friction to distractions makes the right choice easier to follow. This is not about control, it is about alignment. When the environment matches the goal, the brain does not have to fight itself to stay on track. Emotional resistance and how to move through it. There are moments when even simple actions feel difficult, not because they are physically hard, but because they carry emotional resistance. This resistance often comes from discomfort, uncertainty, or past experiences. The brain tries to avoid these feelings by delaying action, but avoiding them only strengthens the resistance. And the shift happens when action is taken despite the discomfort, even in a small way. That sends a signal to the brain that the situation is manageable. Over time, the emotional intensity decreases and the action becomes easier to repeat. This is how confidence is built, not by waiting to feel ready, but by acting before that feeling appears. The compounding effect of daily actions. At first, progress feels slow. Changes are subtle, almost unnoticeable. This is where many people lose patience. But the brain is working beneath the surface, strengthening pathways and building patterns. As days pass, these small changes start to stack. What once felt difficult becomes easier. What required effort starts feeling automatic. This is the compounding effect in action. It does not show immediate results, but when it does, the difference is clear. And the key is staying consistent long enough for that shift to happen. Once it does, maintaining progress becomes much easier than starting from zero again. Identity shift and long-term change. At some point, something deeper begins to change. The focus moves from actions to identity. Instead of trying to act successful, the brain starts believing that success is part of who someone is becoming. This shift reduces internal resistance because behavior and identity are aligned. Small daily wins provide evidence that reinforces this belief. Over time, the new identity becomes stronger than the old one. And once that happens, consistency no longer feels forced. It becomes a natural extension of how the brain sees itself. This is where long-term change is secured, not through effort alone, but through belief backed by repeated action. Turning 21 days into a lasting system. Reaching 21 days is not the finish line. It is the foundation. The goal is not just to complete a short period of consistency, but to build a system that continues beyond it. Systems remove the need for constant decision-making. They create structure that supports daily action without overthinking. When a system is in place, progress becomes more stable. Some days will feel easier than others, and that is normal. What matters is maintaining the pattern, even at a smaller scale when needed. This keeps the brain engaged and prevents regression. Over time, the system becomes part of daily life, making growth feel less like effort and more like a natural process. Rewiring the brain is not about dramatic changes or perfect routines. It is about small, consistent actions repeated long enough to reshape how the mind works. 21 days is enough to start that shift, to move from intention to pattern, from effort to habit. The real question now is not whether change is possible, but what action will be repeated starting today. Share what that looks like and keep the conversation going. And if building a stronger mindset is the goal, staying connected will make sure the next step is always within reach.